All right, so we're just going to talk about the circulatory system. So we'll just do an introduction to circulatory system. Circulatory system, the big components are the blood vessels, and the heart. So there's three major components, right? Obviously, you guys know about the heart. You guys know about blood because when you cut yourself, you see that stuff leaking out of you. One thing we don't often think about is the blood vessels, because we're a closed circulatory system, so all our blood travels through tubes. It never leaves the tubes, and if it does leave the tubes, we're in trouble, right? It's called a hemorrhage. So your body has a way to stop those hemorrhages, those leaks, okay? Now, it does a couple things. The circulatory system transports nutrients, hormones, oxygen, and carbon dioxide. It's throughout the body. And every minute, 5 to 6 liters of blood will pass through your heart, okay? Because your heart is the engine that pumps it around. It doesn't stay stagnant. It's like a flowing river, right? It's not a stagnant lake. It's a flowing river of blood that circulates to your tips of your toes, top of your head, fingertips, and back to your heart. One certainty it must remember to do is go visit the lungs so it can get the oxygen. And it must also visit your gut so they can get the nutrients. Your heart will beat around 100,000 times a day, which is a pretty wicked number. It's 100,000. And a little bit more if you're active, a little bit less if you're not active, but 100,000 times on average. Each cell needs to be in your body. If you have trillions and trillions of cells, each cell needs to be 1 or 2 cells away, or it doesn't get enough nutrients, enough oxygen, or it can't get rid of enough waste product, okay? So if you think about that, you're made of trillion cells, and you think of these red bloods, this blood traveling through blood vessels, kind of like roads. That means every single cell, if it was a house, needs to have a road in front of it, just like in Vancouver, right? So the roads are all the blood vessels, and that's a lot of blood vessels. We also have to remember it has an immune response role. So we're going to take a look at this. There's 2 subtypes. We're going to call it the specific immune response, so very specific to a virus or a pathogen, and then a non-specific. So if you just get like a cut and a bacteria gets in there, your body just has an automatic response to it. So it's not very specific. It just goes, not ours, kill it. While the other ones are like, we found this guy, we have to find the other ones of the same type and kill it. So non-specific and specific. So the blood vessels, there's 3 types. You guys probably know of them. Arteries and veins, right? And then you got your capillaries in between. Now, like I said, every single cell in your body needs to be 1 or 2 or possibly 3 cells away from this. So it's essentially a house on a road, and the road being blood vessel. That means if we cut out every single blood vessel from a human body and stretch it out, put it end to end, it's going to be approximately 161,000 kilometers long. Okay, and you might be just like, that doesn't make sense at all. But some blood vessels can be really big and wide like this. This is your aorta. Now it's come from a heart that's probably 4 times bigger than yours. So this is probably 4 times bigger as well. But it's a major blood vessel. It's the one that branches off your heart, and it feeds blood to your upper extremities and your head, and then also dips down to feed oxygenated blood to your lower portion of your body and your gut. Now this one's really obvious, right? Like if I opened up a cadaver, we would see this. But you also have to remember that in the capillary beds, which are everywhere in your body, they are so thin that the diameter of a blood vessel only allows 1 red blood cell through at a time. So they're super fine. They're finer than the human hair, right? These blood vessels. So where do all of these blood vessels come from? Most of them are because we have these really fine capillary beds that we won't even see, right? So arteries are the vessels that carry blood away, and that's how I remember it, A away. Veins, now if we think of this being Venus, right? Venus being the god of, whose daughter was it? I can't remember. But everyone was really fond of Venus. So if we think of the heart as Venus, this is the one that brings blood to Venus, veins, right? Everyone wants to go to the Venus, the heart. So veins, Venus, arteries away from Venus, okay? And most of the names make sense because they have the V sound in it or the A sound in it, like aorta, right? Aorta, A, away. Here, the major blood vessels that bring blood to the heart are the vena cava, V, inferior vena cava and superior vena cava. So blood coming from your upper body, blood coming from your lower body that needs oxygen. Okay, and those are called your vena cavas, V. Here's a picture of arteries bringing blood away from the heart. It's red because it's got oxygen. You can see how thick it is. That's one of the big differences, is this middle smooth muscle layer is way thicker than this inner smooth muscle layer of the vein. In between are the really fine capillary beds, and we find those in all muscle, tissue, organs, right, everywhere, skin. And on the return, it's the blue because they've lost their oxygen. Now, these are not even, the major vessels, because this artery could turn into the large vessel, the aorta, and then these guys could form the large blood vessels like the subclavian vein or the superior and inferior vena cava, right? So they could be much thicker than that too. Now, a side-by-side view, you can see that it's got this giant thickness in this middle. That's the smooth muscle, and this one doesn't. So that's one difference. The second difference is the valves there. See the valves? So blood vessels actually have valves, where aortas don't, or arteries don't, sorry. Arteries, sorry, I keep saying aorta. Arteries are the blood vessels that take blood away from your heart. So what moves blood through arteries is the actual pumping of the heart. When the heart pumps, squeeze, all of this blood comes out of this top through this, and it comes squirting out of here. And to ensure that this blood vessel doesn't explode, right, it has that muscular inner layer to kind of resist the expansion. Because I usually do this with a balloon. This blood vessel is always semi-inflated, just like a balloon. And when the heart beats, it's like squeezing the balloon. The pressure builds up. So every time you squeeze it, that's like your heart beating. And the balloon will get firmer every heartbeat, and then not so firm as the heart stops beating, right? So that's why it's got that muscular inner layer to kind of to counter the effect of that stretch. Ready? And you can actually feel the thing stretching, right? We do this as a lab, but if you want now, you can feel your pulse. I don't know how many of you guys know about your radial pulse, but if you put out your hand to shake, right, left or right, doesn't matter. You got that little hill right here. If you go up the hill to the top of that hill, and you put 2 fingers on it and slide it down, as soon as you get to that first little curve, you push in, you can feel your pulse. Can you feel it? Yeah. So it's that top of the hill. So you go up to the top of the hill towards your thumb. You're like, oh, we'll just stop here on the top of the hill, check out the view, and then you slide it down towards your wrist, and then that first little gully, you push down. You can feel it, right? You can do, it's bilateral, hopefully. If you only got one side, something's wrong. Another popular one is called your carotid artery. So this is called your radial artery. Your carotid artery is you put it on your Adam's apple, and same thing, you slide it, and then as soon as you go into that gap, that little gully, you just push down. And you'll feel it too. So across the Adam's apple, and then push down. And you can feel it. It's bilateral again. You actually have 2 major blood vessels, 2 carotid arteries, that are feeding your brain with oxygen. So if you sever one, heaven forbid, you would block that one so you don't bleed to death, and then you still have blood going to your brain, right? So that's a really nice feature, that you have 2 going to your brain, just in case of trauma. Some other ones, you got your brachial. Your brachial is if you make a muscle, and you put your fingers on top of your muscle, and you slide it down, and when you get to that valley again, you push into the valley, you can feel it. Okay? So you got your radial, you got your brachial, you got your carotid, you got some on your feet too. You got one right, if you go Achilles tendon and then you slide up, you can feel it. There's one across the top, it's called your pedal pulse, right on top, right across the bony part of the top of your foot. There's a little pulse there. Another one that you should all know, I wouldn't expect you to try it today, but it's your femoral artery. It's the one that runs down the inside of your leg. We don't usually do pulse with that one, right? We don't go, oh, let me just check your pulse, and then your hand disappears. That one's good because if you have a major trauma and you're bleeding in your lower extremities, that's the one we use to block off the blood flow, right? So if someone mangles their foot and there's spurting blood coming out of their foot, what we do is we put a karate chop in there and we push the karate chop in there, and it stops the blood from going down to your foot. Now, you might say, isn't that bad because the tissue is going to die? Yeah, but the tissue can last for 30 minutes, maybe even an hour without blood because it's already got some blood there and some oxygen. So it's better than bleeding to death, right? You can bleed to death really quickly. This one, you feel that pulse because of the pulsing heart. Okay. In fact, your thumb, you're not supposed to use your thumb to check pulses. Like if you came to a body and you're like, oh my gosh, I wonder if they're alive, and you start doing your CPR, right, ABC, airway, breathing, circulation. If you get to circulation and you put their thumb on there, you go, oh my gosh, they're alive, I can feel a pulse. Well, it could be your pulse because your thumb actually has its own pulse, right? You could be staring at a cadaver, right? You're like, I think it's alive. I got a pulse. Really cold and white and head's been decapitated, but got a pulse. It's your pulse. Yeah, it's your pulse. So this is the one that comes from your beating heart. I used to work at the hospital over at UBC, and I remember one so we had a patient come in, and it was a dude, and he lost a fight with another person. The person took a bottle and smashed it over his head. There was blood everywhere, and it was kind of neat because it was really neat because you could see his skull. So where's my skull? So you could see his skull. It flapped his skull. So there was a flap of skin, and you just think about it. Touch your forehead, like you're touching bone through like maybe 2 millimeters of fat and skin. So he had this giant gash right here, and one of the things they had to do first was they had to irrigate it, clean it. And one thing they don't want is foreign objects in there. So the doctor had to flip it up and like rub his finger in there to we call it a digital inspection. So he digitally inspected it, make sure there was no glass in there. And while he does this, right, if you see blood vessels bleeding, they're fairly superficial. All he did was he takes this little hot loop, and it's called a cauterizing gun, and he just cauterizes the ends. Right? So it was neat because we were talking to this guy. He was drunk, and he was kind of ornery, not so happy. So we had a whole bunch of people there, all these nurses, all these doctors, all in there just in case he got really upset, and we just could outnumber him. But we don't. That wasn't. We just pretend that we're all interested, and we were just there to watch him. But he was laying down, semi-reclined, talking while the doctor was irrigating and inspecting, and we were talking. The doctor was like, "Yeah, everything looks good. Everything's fine." And then he peeled back his skin, like this, and every time his heart beat, a little spurt of blood came up and over and landed on his chest. It's like it's like the water fountain in Vegas. You know which one I'm talking about? That goes with the music. And then the guy's like, "What's going on? What's going on?" I was like, "Nothing. And then we just put the skin back over. And then the doctor just like opened it up and cauterized it and then put it down. And then he sutured it. It was really great timing because he sutured, probably needed like 12, 13 stitches across here. Not a plastic surgeon, but just like an emergency doctor, and he did it. Lots of fun. And then as soon as he put the last stitch in it, it just started swelling. It just turned into a marshmallow head, which is very fortunate because if the guy would have been really argumentative or not so cooperative, we wouldn't have stitched him up, and it would have been just all swollen. And then to suture him now, it would have left a bad scar, and he would have needed plastic surgery afterwards. So it was just perfect timing. Went in there, cleaned it out, small talked him, and then got the last stitch in, doink, and then it just poofed up like a marshmallow. And then he probably didn't need plastic surgery after that. So really good timing. So that's your arteries, right? So 3 layers. The big one here is the inner thick layer, right? So that it can actually resist that expanding of the due to the heart beating, okay? And it can actually squeeze back a bit. So that's the arteries. And then it goes to the capillary beds. And now remember, the capillary beds are super, super narrow, super, super thin-walled. And it's because gases have to move past them into the tissue or extracellular space or extracellular fluid. And then the carbon dioxide has to leak back in. So it's got to be thin enough for gas diffusion. It's only about 1 cell thick. The lumen, the opening, is only about 1 cell thick. It's a pretty big cell, mind you. It's a red blood cell. So it fits through there. But we find these capillary beds everywhere in your body, okay? Because every single cell in your body needs to be 1, possibly 2, possibly maximum 3 cells away from one of these capillary beds. If they don't have that proximity, it's going to die. Lack of oxygen, lack of nutrients, or toxicity due to metabolic byproducts like carbon dioxide, right, or nitrogenous waste. Now, the neat thing about them, though, you have so many blood vessels, 161,000 kilometers, that we can't keep them open at the same time. Because if we keep them open all at the same time, you don't have enough blood to fill them up. So they have these little sphincters here. And they can turn them off and on. And you've seen this. Like if you're really hot and your face is all red, it's because these capillary beds have opened it up so that the blood can come to the surface to give away heat. And if it's super duper cold, these things will shut off so blood doesn't go to your skin. Instead, they're stored in your core to keep you warm so you don't freeze to death. And your skin turns white and your fingers are really stiff. And you press your skin feels like wax because if you squeeze it, it kind of doesn't change back. Like it just pinches and stays, and it's because of the lack of blood flow. Yeah. So they're right here. We call them sphincters, right? And they will cut them off and then bypass it so that the blood doesn't go to the capillary bed. It just goes out there, and that makes sense too. Like if you've eaten a big meal, we want that nutrient absorbed, so all the blood capillary beds would open up in your gut and they'd suck up all those nutrients. But if you haven't eaten in a number of hours and there's no nutrients being digested, then that blood going there is just a waste of energy and time. It could be doing something else. So we can turn that blood flow off and on. I used to work at the hospital, and we had this girl come in. She was passed out and she was wearing a garbage bag, and evidently, she was invited to a frat party her first year at university, and they invited her to have some drinks and then go into the hot tub. And you know, in the hot tub, they say to stay for like 15, 20 minutes and then leave. And one of the reasons why is if you go into a hot tub, it causes these sphincters to relax. And if you stay in there too long, all the blood vessels in your lower body will open up, and then your blood pressure drops. And then your heart will try to beat, but there's not enough pressure to get the blood to your brain. So what happens is your body says, okay, enough of this, and it makes you pass out to lay down. Because when you're standing up, the blood has to go against gravity to get to your head. But if you lay down, then there's no gravity really to fight, so your heart has an easier chance of getting blood to your brain. So that's why often people will pass out, right? So she passed out in the hot tub, not very well dressed, I guess. And so they brought her in they called 911. The firemen came and they brought her in a garbage bag and put her on the ER bed for us. So she was all right. She had a story to tell. Then you got your veins. Very similar in arteries, except for the fact that they have a thinner layer and they got those valves. And the reason why is the heart drives the blood through the arteries, but then they subdivide into these really narrow capillaries. And actually the pressure in there is super, super, super low because we don't want these guys whipping through there. These guys actually just trundle along through the capillary beds. So the pressure drops away. And then when it comes back to the veins again, well, what brings the blood back? It's not the pressure created from the, where's my veins at? It's not the pressure created from the heart. It's actually, does anyone know what drives the blood back to your heart? I don't know where. Yeah, it's muscle contraction. So here you go. Here's another model of my heart. So the blue being blood vessels. So when they come back, so the blood goes down and up the red, and then they go into capillary beds, and then they got to come back to the blue. The heart is the one that pumps the blood through the red parts, but what pumps the blood back through the blue parts is actually muscle contraction now. And every time you move your arms and stuff like that, your muscles contract and they squeeze and they milk the blood back because they get past a valve and they can't fall back. So when you go back here. So if you move, your muscles push this and then blood goes up and then it pools here. And then when you move, the blood can't go back down. It just keeps going up. It gets milked up because of the valves. And if you've ever seen varicose veins, you know, maybe your mom, dad, or your grandpa has varicose veins. Those are those really giant black veins down their legs or arms. Those are valves that have been blown. Right? And it can be genetics or it could be from sitting too long. And the valves don't work anymore, so the blood falls backwards and it pools. And you can see them. Sometimes they're very painful because of the pressure buildup. And to treat that, what we can do two things. So let's pretend that's a varicose vein. And if you don't like the looks of it or if it's painful, we can go in there and just cut them out. We just tie them off, and then cut the vein off. And because most of those veins on the surface are just superficial. They're just there to like keep your skin warm and stuff like that. Another way to do it is you take this glue and you inject the glue in there and you just squeeze it and then the glue keeps it shut. And then you can get rid of your varicose veins that way. I think plastic surgeons make a lot of money on varicose veins. They're quite painful and sometimes they're quite unsightly. But that's because the veins have valves in them. And if the valves don't work, then the blood doesn't move in the right direction. Here is a couple pictures of just how dense your blood vessels are. So this guy, obviously dead. When he was alive, maybe not alive, but maybe when he just passed away, they drained him of his blood and then injected the person full of this plastic epoxy, I guess, into their blood vessels and then let it harden and then had the muscle, the flesh, the fat, the connective tissue, the skin all digested away using chemicals and stuff like that, leaving behind the skeleton and the blood vessels. Okay, and you can see just how dense that is. Here's one of a shark. And here, different organisms, a rabbit, a rooster. This is the lungs and the heart. So this looks like the aorta there. This looks like the right lung, left lung. That's the heart. And then these are the branches that go to feed your skin around your ribs and then to your arms. A man thinking about someone else's brain, that's yucky. A head, and then the arm. And you can see how dense they are at the fingertips. Right? See all the blood vessels at the fingertips there? Probably to nourish the nerve endings. Because you have lots and lots of nerve endings on your fingertips there. Any questions? Okay. Why don't we take a minute break here while I set up for your review game. And then we'll do your review game, and then we'll revisit the heart part, okay? And we'll talk about the heart.